I had always believed in the trust we shared, but one fateful night shattered that illusion. As I lay in bed, lost in the haze of sleep, an unexpected incident left me grappling with confusion and disbelief. It all began with the faint creak of a floorboard, pulling me out of my slumber. Startled, I froze, straining my ears to ensure I wasn't imagining things. There it was, again, a soft, hesitant footstep from somewhere in the hallway. Glancing at the clock, I realized it was well past midnight. Who could possibly be up at this hour? Instinct warred with curiosity as I remained motionless, listening intently to the subtle movements. The sound grew louder, pausing just outside my door. My heart raced, and I clutched the edge of my blanket tightly. As the doorknob turned and the door creaked open slightly, an eerie sliver of darkness appeared in the gap. I held my breath, unsure if it was real or a figment of my imagination. Then, as silently as it had opened, the door closed, and the footsteps retreated down the hallway. After several tense minutes, I convinced myself it was all in my head. But just as I started to relax, my phone buzzed, illuminating the room with a single message. "Can't sleep either." It read, "Sent by Noah." Surprised, I stared at the screen, wondering why he, my usually reserved and distant son, had reached out so uncharacteristically. I was typing a reply when the sound returned, this time unmistakably close. My pulse quickened, and I decided to confront whatever was causing it. Quietly, I slipped out of bed and approached the door. The hallway was empty, but a faint light seeped from beneath Noah's door at the end of the corridor. Summoning courage, I knocked softly, noticing the door wasn't completely closed. Peeking inside, I saw Noah sitting on his bed, his face illuminated by the dim glow of his phone. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "You're awake too," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Did you come to my door earlier?" A flicker of something passed over his face before he quickly shrugged. "Maybe. Just checking on things." His words carried an edge I couldn't quite decipher. "Are you okay?" I ventured, cautious not to push too hard. He hesitated, the vulnerability in his eyes fleeting but unmistakable. Then, almost dismissively, he replied, "It's nothing. Just couldn't sleep." The silence between us was thick, loaded with unspoken words. I searched for something to say, but the growing distance between us felt insurmountable. Finally, I muttered, "If you need anything, I'm just down the hall." "Thanks," he said softly, his gaze dropping back to his phone. I lingered briefly before returning to my room, the weight of his unspoken emotions lingering long after I'd closed my door. Sleep was impossible. The house felt oppressive, as if it held secrets I wasn't meant to uncover. My mind replayed the night's events endlessly, questioning Noah's actions and the strange tension in his demeanor. Just as I began to drift off, my phone buzzed again. "Good night." The message was simple, but it unsettled me further. Replying briefly, I set my phone aside, but the unease remained. The silence of the house was unnerving, a heavy shadow of anticipation pressing down on me. Deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. The following morning was surreal. Noah was already in the kitchen, his focus on a steaming mug in his hands. When he glanced up, his guarded expression revealed little, yet something in his eyes hinted at an internal struggle. "Morning," he murmured, his voice barely breaking the silence. "Morning," I replied, the tension between us palpable. Attempting to mask my unease, I busied myself with making coffee, acutely aware of his gaze on me. "Did you sleep?" I asked lightly. He shrugged, his fingers tracing the rim of his mug. "Not really. Too much on my mind." His words hung in the air, and I longed to bridge the gap between us. But fear of pushing too far held me back. Instead, we navigated the day with cautious distance, the weight of our unspoken connection growing heavier with each passing hour. By evening, the tension was unbearable. As we sat in the living room, both pretending to focus on unrelated tasks, Noah broke the silence. You always keep yourself busy, he observed, a faint smile tugging at his lips. It helps pass the time, I replied, trying to match his lightheartedness. But his words carried a deeper meaning, one I wasn't ready to confront. He moved closer, his presence filling the space between us with a charged intensity. It must get lonely, he murmured, his voice soft and laced with vulnerability. I swallowed hard, the proximity overwhelming. Sometimes, I admitted, my voice barely audible. Our shared gaze lingered, and for a fleeting moment, the walls we had built around ourselves seemed to crumble. Yet, as quickly as the connection surfaced, the weight of its implications forced us to retreat. We should pretend this never happened, Noah finally said, his voice strained. I nodded, my heart heavy. Maybe that's for the best. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't entirely true. The bond between us was undeniable, an unspoken understanding that defied reason. And as the days blurred together, filled with stolen glances and hesitant exchanges, I realized that some connections, no matter how complicated, are impossible to ignore.